Good morning. It's 9:17 and we'd like to call the meeting to order and do roll call. I'm Dee Parker, speech language pathologist, board chair.
Marcia Raggio, audiologist, board member.
I'm Chalet, hearing aid dispenser, board member.
I'm sorry, can I just ask that everyone speak up? We have a multi-directional microphone here, one microphone, but we want to make sure that it's nice and clear for the webcast. Amnon, can you repeat this?
I'm Chalet, hearing aid dispenser, board member.
Debbie Snow, board member.
Allison Grimes, audiologist, board member.
Patty Solomon Rice, speech language pathologist, board member.
I'm Paul Sanchez, executive officer of the board.
Sabina Knight, legal counsel.
And at this time, would any members of the audience like to announce their name and where they're from as well?
I'm Dennis Van Vliet, an audiologist from Yorba Linda, California.
Linda Pippert, speech language pathologist representing CASHA.
Kyle Up, speech language pathologist and administrator in the speech and language program for LA Unified School District, and also director of District 6 for CASHA.
Vanessa Kahina, legislative advocate for the hearing health care providers in California.
Brianne Humphreys, operations manager for the board.
Karen Rothison, staff.
Thank you. Are there any public comments for items that are not on the agenda?
Okay. Then we'll go to.
We are on item number 10.
For those who weren't here yesterday, we're starting with item number 10.
Would you like me to start the discussion? Yeah. Okay. As you may recall, we've been talking about, whoops, I need to go to item number 10 on my,
This is the memo. It says,
I know, but I got the wrong memo. I think I put it in front of the wrong thing. I'm sorry about that. Okay, here we go. We had previously spoken about putting together a hearing aid consumer fact sheet, and we've had participation from several of our board members that are experts in the area of hearing aids. We got input from the Hearing Loss Association of America chapter here, and especially people here in Southern California. I actually visited with this group. It was pretty insightful, and one thing that I did observe is that people want this type of information, especially people that are at the point of needing to make this significant purchase of hearing aids at that stage in their life. So it would be helpful when we do consumer outreach to actually have some factual information to provide people to help them in making this very important decision. I'm going to let Marcia talk about the fact sheet. We have put it together. DCA Publications was very kind and actually worked with me on laying it out for us because I wanted everybody to kind of see what it could look like. This is actually being designed for our website. We're not going to go into a mass printing of these. Obviously, it's very expensive, but we want to make this information available to consumers mainly, whether it be through licensees or whether they go and get it themselves. So, Marcia, do you want to talk a little more about this?
Yes.
Oh, Marcia, can I just say one more thing? The stock photos that are in the document, remember this is a draft. I wouldn't pay too much attention. I appreciate your input on the stock photos because we have to find some that are appropriate for what we're trying to do. But I think they're just placeholders at this point, so you can see the layout.
And as he's saying, this is essentially a work in progress. So we hope today to have people take a look at it and give us any feedback they would like to in terms of how it might be better, what we could add, things like that. So it evolved from the need to work with the Hearing Loss Association of America, California, Southern California branch, in fact, to make sure that consumers knew more about T-coils and telecoils, looping systems, and so on, and how helpful they are for people with hearing loss. But we realized that was just one aspect of today's hearing aids, so we wanted to address and provide information about many aspects of today's hearing aids, since they are relatively complex and and much better than the old-fashioned hearing aids. So that's what led to this. They also wanted to have definitions of types of hearing loss, degrees of hearing loss, the functional implications of that, and so on. So we added that. We tried to address, all the major issues having to do with hearing aids. It's not exhaustive, of course, because we wanted to make it readable and understandable for the lay public. But if you think there's some gaping hole in what we've included, then we certainly would entertain adding that. There is a glossary in the back that, again, covers main terms having to do with hearing, hearing loss, hearing testing, and hearing aids. So I think it's looking very good, better than I had hoped even, thanks to Paul and the staff who worked on this. So again, we are happy with it at this point, but would be, again, happy to entertain your thoughts about it.
I have any questions. You talk about the stock photos here.
Yes.
On this, did you mean that there are no custom hearing aids on this photo?
What I actually meant was typically an organization, especially a government organization, has access to certain stock photos out of a catalog.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. I think we were limited. We had this problem when we were putting together a strategic plan.
Yeah.
I know I went through several iterations with Allison trying to find appropriate pictures. I think I might have even run it by Patty at the time on looking at what does a speech language pathologist's office look like? What does an audiologist's office? What's an appropriate? We had like inappropriate bracing techniques and different things like that. So that's what I'm talking about.
There is one picture here of custom hearing aid. The rest on the inside. But here, if you look at this, there's all BTEs here. And the public, 50% of them will buy custom hearing aids. So it has to be shown here. This is not only a hearing aid. This is only part, behind here is not. Especially now, it's an issue when they come over the counter. If everybody would think this is only a hearing aid and the other one they don't know.
Right. That's right. That's the point I was making. This is just a placeholder.
There has to be a variety of
Right.
those.
Right. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to the stock photos.
I did have a thought that I wanted to express, and that is, when I put this together with the help of Tony Variant of the HLAA, it's essentially addressed to adults and adult issues. Now, not that all of these issues don't apply to pediatric hearing aid wearers and patients, but it doesn't address everything having to do with pediatrics. So there may be an aspect of adding a little more, saying a little more. I just kind of wanted to talk to Allison and have an
Well, and I
opportunity.
think maybe conversely, we can acknowledge that this is a publication that is designed to inform adult users, and that because the considerations for pediatric hearing aids are so dramatically different that it would really add a lot to this document in terms of length and depth, but to the typical consumer who might be interested in this document, it might be totally just more confusing information. So my vote would be just draw a bright line and say, hey, this is for adults.
So I did mention that to Paul and said we might want to remove this picture if that's the case, if you agreed with that.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that since there's no discussion of cochlear implants, for example, which are critical as far as children are concerned. And so I would agree completely that there needs to be some type of introductory sentence that states that this information is primarily for adult users.
We have to find a way to say that. There is a reference to cochlear implants in the glossary, though.
Right, but that's, and I don't know that that's the first place people are going to go to the glossary.
Yeah. I have another issue. In a few years, once over-the-counter is being legalized, here we'll have to update it. But right now there is an issue with internet sales. Do we have to go and educate the people what they can expect buying a hearing aid over the internet versus going to an office here and get a personal hearing? Because in internet sales are part of the business today.
you're asking if we have to do this in this document, or should
No,
we be
yeah, I
doing this,
mean, because
period?
we have people
Question
that
mark.
purchase hearing aid in the internet and come for us
Right,
for
right.
service.
But
And-
Amnon, are you asking, should we put together that type of information?
Yeah, I mean, because the
Or
consumer.
In reference to this document, though, or?
Yeah, because a consumer,
Okay.
about the service, I mean, I don't know if Department of Consumer Affairs wants to educate the consumer. There's a difference between buying from a professional
Right.
here that is licensed and regulated under this board, or versus buying via the internet, which they have no protection.
So I think I would go back to the purpose of this
Yeah.
document, which I think was just a very basic understanding of hearing aids.
Yeah.
But to your point, which I think is, going back to what I was saying, and I know in talking to Marcia about this earlier, I think that these types of documents would be helpful. When I talk to consumers, they're concerned about this, but they really want to know, what should I be looking out for? The questions I get is, are these advertisements that I see from, Dr. so-and-so, who's not really, who's portraying himself as a doctor, who's not, who's telling you this great deal in the newspaper or in ads, is this real? Can I trust this? So that type of information would be helpful in maybe a separate document.
Because there is a reference here that this is a document of Department of Consumer Affairs.
Right.
And as such, maybe just in kind of notation that hearing aid purchase over the internet are not subject to regulations here. I mean, that somebody buy a hearing aid and over the internet has an issue, will call the Department of Consumer Affairs, but you cannot do anything about this, right? If someone buy
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
buy over the internet, I'm talking about just if we can, and it's not much, it's just one sentence, to say that if we do, and this is to consumers, right?
So you're saying the statement from the board that talks about what we regulate and what we don't regulate?
Yeah, right, that to know that
A
hearing
statement,
aid
okay.
business is regulated by Department of Consumer Affairs Board,
Sure.
and hearing aids that are purchased out of state, but via internet or mail order, catalog or stuff like this, are not subject to this. So people will know that there is a different expectation for protection, because if they buy here from a dispenser, they have some protection. If they buy it over the phone or the internet, they have no protection
Right.
whatsoever.
So some type of
Yeah,
statement
just
that
a
explains
statement
our
to know
jurisdiction.
which one, right.
Okay.
We do regulate catalog
Internet?
hearing aids, don't we?
Well, I think what Amnon is saying, though, is maybe something that just explains how maybe the board's jurisdiction. So when a person would not be able to apply Song-Beverly Act, for instance.
For everything.
Right.
Everything. If somebody buy over the internet, he has no protection whatsoever. Maybe the only protection is his credit card dispute.
Right.
Well, we're going to be talking about OTCs later,
Sure.
and what our purview is.
But we could probably look at that and work with you on that too, Amnon.
Yeah.
I want to get back to what Patty said. There isn't a lot in here about cochlear implants, and because that wasn't the focus.
Right.
And nor are cochlear implants the purview of children. Lots of people get cochlear implants. So if we should add that, should we, a section on that? That's not what HLAA was looking for, but we could. But then do we also add middle ear implants? Do we go into other types of amplification?
I think one thing that would be really helpful in this document is that there is a not insignificant number of people who have severe hearing loss, who try hearing aids again and again, and their audiologist or hearing aid dispenser fails to make a referral for cochlear implants, perhaps out of ignorance and or perhaps out of not wanting to lose a customer. And I think we know in the world of cochlear implants, we know that there are a lot of adults who could benefit from a cochlear implant and get greater benefit ultimately than what they can get from even the best fitted hearing aid. It would be nice to insert a brief mention of, if you find that you are still having substantial difficulty hearing even after your hearing aids have been adjusted by your audiologist or hearing aid dispenser, you might be a candidate for a cochlear implant. Just even throw that out there, because I think a lot of people don't even realize that that's a possibility.
And add to that something about middle ear implants, that there are other types of...
I guess in my world, and it just may be in my world, middle ear implants are not even on the radar. And I work in a big medical center. They're just, I don't, maybe somebody in the audience, in the public, do you have any idea of the proportion, Victoria or Dennis, of the proportion of people who actually get middle ear implants?
I think it's more regional. If you're in an area where there is research and...
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
In Northern
Okay.
California, where they manufacture them, it's
Right.
well known.
So and that then goes to the scope of this document. I applaud the approach and the purpose behind this document. I think you have to be careful of developing laundry lists of nomenclature that really don't help a consumer. I don't know that it's useful to say ITE, VTE, all of these others. You could simply provide a paragraph that says there are a variety of styles, and part of the decision whether or not to get a hearing aid is also what style of hearing aid, and your professional can help you make that decision. That's probably more meaningful than a laundry list of types of hearing aids. And very much the same thing with the types of hearing loss. There is some value in briefly describing what it is, but there's probably greater value in saying that when someone's a candidate for a hearing aid and they have a sensory neural hearing loss, there is no restoring of hearing. All we're going to do is provide amplification, and it's going to be limited. The benefit will be limited based on the pathology. And that's probably more meaningful than a long anatomy and physiology lesson that talks about other things.
Except this is somewhat of a political document also, and we got written recommendations from HLA about what they would like to see in such a document.
Well, I would go back and negotiate. They're reasonable people, and I would think that if they see the rationale, the idea is to inform the consumers and help consumers make decisions. They might take a look at that and say, oh, okay, we agree.
Possibly, but they did go back. They went to the national office with their concerns. They met as a large group and came forward with their recommendations and their requests for the information that should exist in this thing. So that's how it evolved.
Well, it's going to come out under your name, the Department of Consumer Affairs, and so I think that it ought to represent information that is, that the purpose is consumer protection and to help the consumer. And so we want to make sure that it isn't going after recommendations that are driven more for commercial purposes rather than protecting the
Do
consumer.
you think it does that now that it has commercial implications, that's driving this?
I think it could be there's much information here that could be better said. Now I don't believe that it's commercially driven, except for the point that brought up this part of the conversation is we're limiting what we're talking about. I know that the telecoil is not commercially driven. That's an opinion area, and we need to be very factual, as you have been in the paragraph that's there. I still think that paragraph should have some edits, but I know that's a hot topic.
If you would like to provide any edits, we would entertain them if you think something
Sure.
is,
How would you
could be
like that?
better
I
stated.
can simply send a document and say, here are my suggestions for these sections.
No, that
and-
would definitely be entertained.
Yeah, I'd be
if
happy
you
to
did.
do that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Did you say it would be entertaining? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, okay.
Resist.
No,
Well, I can make sure it's both.
that's even better.
I agree with a lot of those points. As to the copy, I don't have a lot of input on that. I think that this is a document that this board has worked really hard on, in particular you. That being said, it is a politically driven document, and I want to take a step back and look at the entire reason why we have this as opposed to having to do a notification on telecoils for every hearing aid sold in the state. So it would appear that now the goal of the advocacy community might have moved from where we were initially, and it being as factual, and then maybe having a few places where you indicate that you might want to look for more additional professional help. This is a more medicalized problem, might be the way to go, and here's how to find it.
Okay, that's a good idea. We'll look into what references we could add to this. I would like to see more. We picked a textbook. There's, 100 textbooks we could have, so I didn't want to put that Brad Stack book in there either, although many of the definitions are borrowed from that book. But it's, I think, public domain information. A lot of it's in my head.
It's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's, I guess the limitation of a paper document, this will be on our website.
This will be on primarily a
So
website
then we can
document.
have clickable links. I mean, which to me would be enormously helpful. And
Yep.
somebody who wants to
Yeah,
really
that would.
drill down into cochlear implants or into
Yes.
middle ear
Yeah.
implants
Yes.
with
Yes.
a clickable link, that's possible. So
We have to look politically at the links, though, too, because
Yeah.
if looking at these two, if I'm going to put in Hearing Loss Association of America, I would like to put in, the American Academy of Audiology.
Sure.
And then, well, if you do that, you need to put in the American Speech Language Hearing Association.
Right.
And
Or you just put in the
uh,
CDC and the NIH and be done with it. And there's our governmental organizations that have all
Yeah.
of the.
So take out the
I-
HLAA reference.
Yes, I would completely agree with not putting in professional organizations,
Yes.
but sticking with government organizations. This is a government document, so we should be sticking strictly with government agencies. We don't want to go there.
Yeah, it does. It opens up a can of worms.
It's,
Yeah, for so
yeah,
many
we
reasons.
just don't want to go there.
It'll take us 3 years just to get through the politics of
Yeah,
this.
yeah, no.
If we go to page 8, over-the-counter devices, you see it's written here, over-the-counter, which will be available to the public once federal regulation are approved. I think it should be federal and state. I think even if the federal approved, but the state didn't change the regulation, it's not legal yet in the state, right? Probably will do it, but it will take time.
The federal regulations will make over-the-counter hearing aids available to everyone.
Without any change of
Right.
regulation?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh.
Because the
No,
feds.
That's
So
why
the
we're going to
state-
talk about it this
Yeah.
morning.
We can only make it more
Okay.
restrictive.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Or protective.
Okay, so I have a list of changes we want to make, and I'll happily receive Dennis's edits and see how they might work, and Vanessa's suggestion as well, Amnon's, and keep working on it, if that's okay.
Yeah, and I still have some as well, of course. But I can just scribble this and give it to you.
Could you? That'd be great. Or
Yeah.
email, if
Okay.
you want to think about it longer or something.
That sounds
Okay.
good.
I'm sorry Tony isn't here today.
Me too.
Because she could have told us how HLAA is looking at this, but from what we heard, they were pleased with it, but that's hearsay.
Well, and, going back to the original impetus behind this was about the telecoils. I think that telecoil section is very well written and probably really hits the points of these are advantages. We might even, add another statement that the big advantage of using a T-coil is overcoming signal-to-noise ratio problems. And
That's an esoteric term, though, that
I'm sorry?
It's an esoteric term,
Oh,
signal
yeah,
noise
I
ratio.
wouldn't use it in
Yeah.
that. I mean, I wouldn't say SNR, but just something along that line. I mean, this is why a telecoil is helpful. In a looped environment, we would say signal to noise, but in lay terms, it allows the user to hear the desired speech or without being bothered by extraneous noise in the room.
No, that's a good idea.
Yeah. And I would even take another step forward and say the telecoil is not available in every hearing aid style and must be considered and ordered at the time that the hearing aid is ordered, because it's pretty awkward to go back and add it. I mean, it's possible, but it's
Yeah.
quite difficult. It's a pain.
That came right out of the HLAA recommendations that you say, have that statement there, ordered at the time of the hearing aid evaluation.
Yeah, and so then maybe just removing the term, it is best if they are, and just saying they are ordered at the time of the hearing aid evaluation. Unless that's language that they absolutely wanted verbatim.
No, I don't believe so.
Uh-huh.
It was just the concept.
Because if you don't order it, as you and I both know, if you don't order it at the time of the first fitting,
Yeah.
then you have to go back and order a second hearing aid and exchange the first one.
Their contention too was that they're not told about it, that the
Right.
consumer's not informed that there is such a thing,
Uh-huh.
and let alone ordering it at the
Yeah.
time.
Well, then we could add a sentence here saying, discuss
Discuss
the
with it,
advantages
yeah.
of a telecoil with your hearing healthcare provider or with your
Mhm.
audiologist or hearing aid dispenser. Should we be saying Bluetooth or wireless? Bluetooth seems kind
That's
of
one of my
narrow.
comments,
Yeah.
that, in order for this document to live as long as it can,
Yeah.
some of these technologies should have a more general
Generic,
description.
Yeah.
And not Bluetooth?
Well,
Just wireless?
Bluetooth may
Bluetooth
live
is
for a while,
wireless.
but wireless described it quite well and encompasses the transmission media of others, 2.4, 900 megahertz, a variety, and of course, the telecoil was the original wireless, so that helps cover a lot of that.
Do you think consumers are familiar with the term Bluetooth, though, so that at least we could parenthetically say Bluetooth? Use the term wireless, but just
I
because
would
of their
say that
familiarity?
consumers are quite aware of it,
Right.
sure. It doesn't hurt, although I'm looking to avoid the limits.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Does the department, I know in federal publications, there is consideration of the language level, of the literacy level of the average reader. So in federal publications, they gear a lot of materials for consumers to about a 5th grade reading level. Is that something that there's an oversight committee within the department that would look at the level of language being used and make sure that it is consumable by all language or literacy level reader people?
The department has, the people that I've dealt with in publications have been great, and I know that they have a really good background in laying out these types of documents and putting together. I know we have a standard style that we work by. I don't know specifically about looking at that as far as the level of the reader, because consumers are such a, I know when I worked for CalSTRS, we targeted teachers, and teachers were a very particular group, and with consumers, it's a much broader group, much broader audience.
Yeah.
But that's something that we can look at. I do think that they heavily rely on us to put this together, and are counting on us to know our audience. So
Yeah.
if that's something that we want to look for, that's something that as we put this together, I can talk to the people in publications and make sure that we are aware of that.
I'd also like to forward this to Tony, so I can actually get her to show it to her
Absolutely.
HLAA colleagues and make sure that they feel that it's readable and that there isn't anything missing that they really want it to be.
And that's something that I think is very important. When, excuse me, whenever in my other jobs or assignments we put together these types of publications, we actually ran it by a focus group and then came back to the experts again. Now, we don't have to do something as elaborate as a focus group, but by running it by consumers, you get that feedback. So we can work with Tony and maybe look at some other people. Can you tell us what you gleaned from this and use that feedback to refine it?
Okay.
Are there any other comments from the public? Okay. If not, we'll move on to item 11, which is a discussion and possible action regarding supervision requirements for hearing aid dispenser trainees.
If you turn to tab 11, I've included a memo and a spreadsheet from Marty Schaefer, one of the board staff members. And we've been talking in the office about some of the issues that come up from the current supervision requirements for a hearing aid dispenser trainee. As you know, the requirements for a hearing aid dispenser are that they are 18 years of age and have a high school diploma or a GED. There are no training requirements to actually take the exam. While many of them are qualified and have experience, we don't require it as a board. For trainees, it's very much the same thing. So we see a potential for consumer harm in that trainees are only required to be supervised 20% of the time. So that means that 80% of the time they're not directly supervised. And another issue is that direct supervision is not defined in our hearing aid dispenser regulations. So I want to just kind of go over the regulations so that we all understand what I'm looking at. It's California Code of Regulations 1399.119, and the actual definition is in the memo, but I'll just read the introduction. It says a trainee applicant under section 2538.28, that's the Business and Profession Code reference, shall fit or sell hearing aids only under the direct supervision of the supervising licensed hearing aid dispenser. Direct supervision is used in the section means all of the following. And then we laid it out in the memo there. A supervising dispenser is present within the same work setting a minimum of 20% of the time in which the trainee applicant is providing services. The supervising dispenser shall approve the selection of a hearing aid by a trainee applicant. The supervising dispenser shall countersign the audiogram and all sales documents prepared and consummated by a trainee applicant. If a trainee applicant fails a license examination, the supervising dispenser is required to be physically present at all fittings and sales made by the trainee applicant, regardless of whether these occur in or outside of the supervising dispenser's business location. So again, if you go back to that very first sentence in the code, it says, a trainee applicant under section 2538 of the code shall fit or sell hearing aids only under the direct supervision of a supervising hearing aid dispenser, and you can add 20% of the time. So that means 80% of the time they're able to do it without supervision. The immediate issue that's the immediate issue that we point out in the memo. And then there's some other discussion on what other state boards are doing, requirements to actually take the examination. I don't expect us to resolve all this today, but I think that it would be a good time to start to have this discussion. I also asked Marty to look at the SLIPA supervision definitions and requirements, because I know that was something that was, a lot of time was spent on that. And SLIPAs are required to have training. They have very specific requirements, and yet even with those requirements, we have more rigid supervision requirements and better definitions. So I think that as a licensing board looking out for consumer protection, this is something that we need to look at in our next upcoming meetings.
So I have a question about becoming a hearing aid dispenser in general. And we don't have any academic training requirements in our regulations. I understand that. And Anna, and I'll ask you, are there, is it strictly an on-the-job training type of profession? Are there courses that your
There
aid
is some,
dispensers
I
can
think
take?
there is a few, I'm getting some solicitation. Do you remember there's this guy, they're doing seminars. I don't know if
Yeah, I know who you mean, Ted
No.
somebody.
this guy, I'm getting seminars, but really, I'm telling you, it's hard to find.
Okay, so
It's hard to find. And usually you will see a lot of family-oriented business.
Yes.
Is like our son is second generation.
right. But
And-
he's an audiologist, a little different.
Yeah, he want to take it more. Okay, so usually it's training by another dispenser,
Yeah.
and I see two elements in this. There's one is the theoretical training and making a hearing test, which is not so dangerous to the consumer, but taking an ear mold impression, looking and observing the ear canal before and knowing if there's any diseases prior to do this, and looking after if you didn't leave any residual impression there. This is really the critical point on the training. Now, so my idea about training is, first of all, I don't know how we can audit 80%. How is the board can audit the supervision? It's just based on just testimony of the people, right?
Right.
Because we cannot
That's
edit.
true.
That's
That's
what
true.
was all
But,
said.
but,
Anything.
All of
so,
them.
Yeah.
yeah, so the supervision over a hearing test is less critical than the supervision of taking an ear mold impression. So I suggest that taking an ear mold impression by a trainee will be under an immediate supervision. Immediate is even stricter than direct supervision. It's over the shoulder, it's called. Direct supervision, I think, you have to be in the same office or something. But immediate supervision, I think it's termed in the law. Right? I want to ask you, do you know immediate supervision? There is a
Yeah, I mean,
definition.
you have to physically be present with the
You have to be
person.
over the shoulder.
Yes.
Really. I mean, looking at the person who's doing the impression.
So what you're saying is they're really, so it is primarily on-the-job training, and pretty much what it comes down to is if they can pass the practical exam that we give, they are, A-okay to go.
Yeah.
And so I am just
And
wondering.
the written.
Yes, that's what I'm talking, the practical and written exam
Yeah.
is what the requirement is.
Right.
And I'm just thinking that surely there is continuing education in how to do mold impressions, for example. Is there continuing education in
I don't know.
this?
No.
Yes.
From
I mean,
dispensing
yes,
audiologist
but it's not
perspective?
available to, I don't know about this.
Okay, so dispensing audiologists can take continuing education in this
Yes,
particular
and hearing
area.
aid manufacturers, because they want to sell hearing aids of certain types, will
Right.
offer that training.
Yes.
Right, and those can be approved for continuing education. So the answer to your question is yes. Are they available in other venues? That would be up to state organizations,
Right.
someone else to provide.
So
I
my-
was not
my-
aware about the manufacturers that doing continuing education of how to take an ear mold impression.
I am.
Oh, yeah?
I
Okay.
am. So I did that
Oh.
when I worked for a hearing aid manufacturer.
Yeah.
So we did that for 8 years, routinely.
So my
And
point-
did you, they stop, you said we've done it for the last 8 years or a long time ago?
No, just the past 8 years.
I'm not
So I
aware.
guess
Okay.
my point is, in lieu of there are not academic courses or fieldwork study that
Yeah.
the hearing aid dispenser is required to do, which is not the case for SLPAs.
Yeah.
I am wondering if we can get a little bit more control over things for consumer protection that requires continuing education training in specific areas of concern. I'm just throwing this out on the table as something to consider.
Well, I think, I think that's something we should consider. One is, do we take a more direct approach and look at what's in law right now, and is that adequate supervision, and do we need to define supervision for hearing aid dispenser trainees?
Yes.
The other is a much broader picture
Yes.
of what's required, because currently what's required in the law is that you pass a
Right.
written and practical exam. So the law assumes that once you've passed that exam, you are okay to safely perform these procedures that Amnon is referring to. So I guess where the gap is why is it okay for someone 80% of the time to be unsupervised doing this work when it's not okay for, if you have to be licensed to do it, then how is it that a trainee with no experience can walk in and just, and here's where my issue is that when I talk to consumers, I ask them, when you go to a location, do you know who you're talking to?
They don't.
Who are you talking to? Are you talking to a trainee? Are you talking to a licensed hearing aid dispenser? Are you talking to a dispensing audiologist? Are you talking to someone who is just working at that retail location? So what I tell them is ask, are you a licensed hearing aid dispenser? Are you a licensed dispensing audiologist? And we go over those definitions. My concern is that if you have a trainee who's not supervised today, because I'm only required to be supervised 20% of the time, how are we protecting consumers? How can we ensure that that person knows what they're doing?
So what
Yes.
I'm suggesting that there will be 100% supervision of ear mold taking, 100% of immediate supervision. So if somebody come to my office today and said, you're a trainee, and then I go, and he's available to take impression right now. Without, this shouldn't be happening.
Well, and I'm just throwing this out on the table that I think above and beyond being supervised by someone, we don't know that the person supervising them is very skilled either.
No, he is
And-
licensed, he is a licensed. by
But the
state.
person is licensed, but there are varieties of skill levels in licensed individuals, and we all know that. And I think that since we're opening this up for some change, I'd like to hear us also discuss the idea of getting some actual real life training that needs to be done, as well as being supervised by someone who's already licensed. Those are two very, very different things.
So that's something we can put on a future agenda?
Yes.
But that is actually part of this discussion.
Yeah,
That's
it
something that
is.
we've
We're talking about
identified.
changing
Well,
And I think,
I would like to say
That's
that
it.
I completely agree with you, Amnon.
Yeah.
It is, we all know, it is the single most dangerous thing that, that a hearing aid dispenser does. Frankly, it's one of the most dangerous things that an audiologist does.
Yeah.
The idea that someone could take an ear impression with no supervision, no training, 4 days out of 5 days of the week. That's definitely not consumer protection, because that consumer could end up losing their eardrum, their ossicles, God only knows what. They could end up having to have microsurgery on an emergency basis. I agree with you.
How long is the duration of a trainee? Cannot be forever, right?
let me ask Brianne the specifics, because there's some real specifics in regulation. Excuse me, the question was how long?
A trainee can be a trainee,
6 months, and then there's
and he must,
two extensions after that, so a total of 18 months.
18 months. And what is the reason? Just filing an extension and that's all? I mean, so it's 18 months, really. I mean,
And usually the extensions are needed so they can take the exams.
yeah. After the 18 months or not?
So
The 18 months is a max.
Yes.
I see. And
Amnon, just to clarify, Brianne, that's if they fail one exam, like if they fail a practical exam, they ask for an extension to continue working.
Or they haven't taken an exam yet.
Okay, and that's why that's why our regulation says that if you take and fail the exam, you're required to have full
100%.
supervision, 100% supervision.
Right.
So that's a situation in which they might come and say, I need an extension so I can continue training
But at that
and then
point-
take the exam
Uh,
again.
so I suggest that also that we will ask that the trainee will go to a written practical within the first 6 months. And not that the 18 months he will go, and you know what I mean? Not to make shorter, so he will start learning for the test right away.
Okay.
Let me clarify,
Wait.
can I just clarify something? The extension, is that associated with the exam? Or,
No.
okay.
It could be for any reason whatsoever.
It could be they haven't been able to get into the exam because the exams are full.
Can we ask her-
Vanessa?
Can we ask her to come up too so that
Come
the
up
mic
and then
can
we'll-
pick her up?
So I think in having talked with a number of the HHP members prior to this meeting, when we started to look through this a little bit further, especially on trainees, I think that there is a lot of agreement that there should be some sort of standard. However, there are also a number of other items on the agenda where we keep going back to training, and this is a big question in the profession, is do we keep making these circular arguments as to, so a hearing aid dispenser would only need to take the test and sit through the practical exam and be 18 years old and have a high school diploma. I think that this opens up a larger set of arguments, but in the meantime, if we are talking about trainees and different supervision standards, then particularly on the more anatomical aspects of fitting, then we're here for the conversation. We want to be involved in it. If there's some sort of ad hoc working group that we could put together, clearly it's been difficult to culminate the hearing aid dispenser subcommittee, but I think that that would also be an appropriate place to really start to work through this.
I'm wondering, oh.
Can I just ask a follow-up to Vanessa? Vanessa, do you have individuals that would be willing to work with us on this?
Yes.
Okay. If you could provide me their names, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I want to make sure I understood what you said about the extension. I was under the impression that if you're a trainee, you take the exam and fail, then after that, you require 100% supervision.
Up to
Even if there is an extension.
Yes.
Yes.
So once you fail, you must be under supervision 100%, no matter whether or not you have an extension.
That's correct.
That's how I understood
That's
it,
correct.
and that's correct.
I think this give the incentive to some people not to take the
Exactly.
exam.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Until
My-
the 18, or
my
then
thought
go
is-
after 18 months, take another trainee from the street,
Exactly.
go
I mean-
for 18 months and take another used car salesman and turn around like this.
Right.
Hold on, just one at a time. Vanessa, can you repeat?
And so also to that point, then there would also have to be some accountability with the license holder.
Yes.
I don't know that our entire profession would be happy about that. It's about consumer protection.
Yeah.
So in my mind, anyone who read the regulations would say, well, I'm just not ever going to take the exam
Yeah.
because, for goodness sakes, I only have to have 20% supervision without taking the exam.
Right.
God forbid I should fail the exam, then all of a sudden I need 100% supervision.
And there's
It should kind of be the opposite. I mean, it.
Well,
And
are
the
you saying
chance of
that it's
is-
incentive for the trainee or incentive for the
For the
owner of the
owner. I
business?
think No, for the owner.
Certainly.
For the
Incentive
owner,
for
he
both.
the owner
Yeah,
doesn't
it's
want to be
both, both.
Yeah.
I don't see the incentive for the trainee because if he wants to start working as a hearing aid dispenser,
He
making
wants
money as
100% supervision.
Well,
The
he
trainee
wants to
will
be
like
a-
100% supervision.
I think the trainee wants to be a hearing aid dispenser and actually work and make money as a hearing aid dispenser and be
Right.
able to do the job.
Yeah, because-
However, if
but-
they can have all these customers and maybe I don't know how they're paid, it doesn't make
Yeah,
any difference.
yeah.
But if there's an incentive to see a lot of customers and do a lot of this work, then it behooves them to have less supervision because the supervisor doesn't have to be around all the time. They can both be doing
Right,
it.
and I'm assuming that they're not paid the same. I
And
don't
the
know.
supervisor
No, but-
will fire the person who failed right away because
Yeah.
he cannot be 100% with this guy.
Exactly, so it's really an
So
incentive
you see,
for
once you
both.
failed as a trainee, you're fired.
Yeah, it's an incentive to both.
No, okay.
How realistic is it to cull out certain aspects of the work that they do and assign supervision percentages to that? We're going to have 100% for ear impressions. We're going to have 30% for audio, hearing testing. We're going to have 10% for history taking. I don't know, whatever. Is that realistic to do rather than 100% supervision for trainees until they pass the test?
Well, I think it is realistic. It's as realistic as any supervision requirements are. The board has limited staff. We can't be everywhere watching, making sure they're supervising. But I think that, if we have to draw the line somewhere and say this is what is required, and if we're looking at the idea that we're trying to protect people from harm, I think that's the way to go. I imagine in talking to professionals and having a work group, we might get more insight. But the only other option would be to actually restrict people from doing this until they take the exam. And I don't know that's something that, I don't know whether or not we'd want to consider that.
Does that also suggest that we have to revisit other types of supervisory positions and look at what levels of supervision they are required to have for certain activities?
Absolutely. I think that every aspect in which the board requires supervision, we should have tight regulations in those areas.
Don't you
I
have,
would completely agree. I mean, the ear impression is the sort of most urgent and immediate potential cause for harm. But the hearing test, otoscopy, failing to see a warning sign, that's all serious stuff.
Yeah.
So-
And tympanometry can be if you're in the
Sure.
wrong hands.
Yeah.
Well-
Yeah, so this really begs, I think, the bigger question of
Tympano- we
looking
don't
at
do tympano.
all of
No, but we're
the
talking about
knowledge,
audiology
skills, and
aids
activities
and-
that a
Oh,
hearing
okay.
aid
They
dispenser
don't have
does,
specific
and really
amounts of
calling out which
supervision
of those
either.
things
Oh.
can safely be done by somebody who hasn't passed the exam, and it's probably going to be a much smaller list, and which of those things really does need to be under a heightened level of supervision.
And I beat a dead horse possibly, but also some education in those higher, well, in all areas, but in particularly those higher risk areas. Some type of
I believe to be a
educational training.
supervisor, you need to have few years experience as a license before you can be a supervisor.
That's correct, 3 years.
3 years, so it's not like okay, so it's 3 years. You have to be a licensed dispenser in order to supervise.
Great thing for a committee.
Dennis?
To answer to Marcia's question about, well, is it feasible that you pull out pieces that would require a higher level of supervision? 10 years ago, that was really important because you needed an ear impression for every hearing aid that was sold. Today, about 75 or 80% have the possibility of being fit with a standard tip, so an ear impression isn't necessarily required. So it's a little different today than it was before. You might still be able to have somebody do some work, talk with patients, sell product, and not have to take an ear impression. I think Allison's point, though, brings that there are other things beyond the impression that were just as critical. So we still have that consideration. Are they being constantly tested, examined, and so on?
Yeah, but regardless of the percentage of impression, non-impression sales, I still think that there should be 100% immediate on those who take the ear impression, even if it's very small amount.
They already have a committee?
I agree with you, Emma.
I'm going to ask Vanessa. A few years ago, there was discussion in HHP that we heard about in terms of trying to encourage hearing aid dispensers to seek and achieve more training, that to make it some sort of entry-level kind of thing. And at the time, the leadership said, well, we asked. We tried to set something up. We suggested it. And the constituency said, no, we don't want to do any of that kind of extra training stuff. We don't want any requirements. So they kind of had to let it go. Is that still the thinking?
It's something that we can bring back to the board to see if there's been an overall change in opinion. What I can say a little bit more anecdotally is that in, I think, the 3.5+ years now that I've been working with them, there has been a desire to increase the level of the profession. So I wouldn't say that it's a non-starter to begin with. But as you've indicated, there's a larger body than just the board that I work with who tend to, seek out a lot of additional training on their own, even if that's out of state. I can't say for sure, but under the context of this conversation, I think that it's a place where we can start.
And I might add, in terms of consumer protection, it's not all up to the association and the members of the association as well. Much of it is up to us to set up regulations that allow for a minimum proficiency. So it's not just up to what an association is interested in having done, but it's also up to us.
However, let me just speak to that. Alice and I, on the early days of the board, had made a big push to try to improve things, to have people better trained, to protect the consumer more. And we kind of got slapped down with the notion that this board, this licensure is about minimum competency. It's not about making experts in everything. And we didn't get very far. We're kind of disheartened by that. So if Paul, I don't know if you can speak to that at all, or Sabina, just the notion that it is a minimum competency. That's all
Yes.
the state is asking for.
Yeah, that's correct. These are minimum standards that we are seeking. I do think it's wise to. Patty makes a point. I mean, we are that body that is going to establish regulations, but I think it's wise to consult with stakeholders, and sometimes there are things that we will discover in talking to them. I don't work in hearing aid dispensing, so there's a lot of things obviously that the insight that I don't have. And I know in talking to Vanessa and talking to other members of HHP, there has been an interest in some type of apprenticeship or training program. So I think that interest is there. Yes.
Yeah, this is true. There have, in the past maybe 2 years, been some more national level efforts to establish an apprenticeship. I don't know that would necessarily come with a formal education or coursework. I need to go back and look at what the curriculum is, but that's another place to start and to kind of add in to what we're talking about right now.
And also, again, we establish minimum competency. There's no doubt about that. That's our objective. But professions change, and most professions, what was required 10 years ago or 15 years ago for entry level is now more advanced than it used to be. So,
As it was
changes.
then.
And so, that's all I can say about that, is that what used to be fine as far as minimum competencies is now advanced to a different
You can
level in
imagine we felt that
many
way.
professions.
We felt that way in 2000 also, that now we
Look
have
at
new
AE
advancements.
audiology. I mean, it went from a
Right.
master's level to a clinical
But
doctor.
it's an evolving thing, and I
Yes.
get what you're saying. It's just that we just ran up against a brick wall with that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, maybe it's time to revisit.
Well,
Maybe it's time to revisit.
and just to kind of give, ultimately what we're getting to is the regulatory process, and we have to answer to the Office of Administrative Law the questions as to why. Why does this make sense to you? Why are you doing this? Why are you giving, or why are you taking away? And I think that it would behoove us obviously to make sure that we've dotted all our I's and crossed our T's. The professions do change, and we have we work with OPES to make sure that we capture that. We do occupational analysis. We look at current trends. We look at the validation of our exam. This is why I think it's so important to do what we're doing, because there is a gap here. We have a regulation that, despite the fact that we have OPES doing an exam validation and an occupational analysis, allows for people to work around that and still practice hearing aid dispensing.
But for years, the hearing aid dispensers were viciously after the audiologists that they will not be able, even doctor of audiology will not be able to take an ear impression without the practical test for years. And here, I was not aware so much. Here, as a person can take tomorrow an ear impression with a high school diploma or even less. To be a trainee, you don't need a high school diploma, right? To be a trainee. Do you need? Do you need a high school diploma to be a trainee? Not a license. Oh, okay. That's a protection. Okay, so no, but this is we all remember, and this is the history, and that's why the board is now combined of hearing aid dispenser and audiologists. That's because of this fight that they were not allowed, doctor of audiology, finish school, done some probably impression, maybe a couple in school. I don't know. Do they do today
Yes.
Huh?
Oh,
Do audiologists do
the
couple?
students who come out and to do their 4th years with me at UCLA,
Yeah.
they do better ear impressions than my staff does.
Okay, so and they are
They
not
get
allowed to take
extensive
an ear
training.
impression,
Right.
and we let trainees to come and
Right.
take an ear impression. It's really troubling. And now we can do the regulations, but I think for practical, the association are contributed to make it practical. To give an input how to make it practical for the members that are doing it in the field.
Right.
Well, beyond what you read from the law, are there recommended goals and objectives for the training during this period, whether under supervision? Do we provide the supervisors
No.
with guidelines?
No, I could answer that very easily. No. The board actually was working on some training guidelines a few years back. I think I came kind of on the tail end of that. And then it became a little problematic. I wasn't part of all those discussions. I know that, I think Allison, you were, and I think Marcia, Amnon, maybe you were. One of the problems with establishing training guidelines is that there's no requirement for training. So we were kind of getting the cart before the horse. We were working on these guidelines, but we hadn't yet required training.
They were considered underground regulations, as I recall.
Right.
So we kind of had to stop what we were doing.
You say here, you have guidelines for people when they're preparing for the practical exam. Here are the things that you're expected to do.
Right, but the practical exam is mandated. That's required. The training wasn't required. So we're talking about two different things. One is the exam.
Yeah.
So we put an outline and guidelines out there for taking the written and practical exam, but the training would have been provided to licensees. Here's some suggestions on how to train your licensees, and there was no enforcement behind it because it wasn't required.
So,
It would have just been a nice to have.
right, but that's very much like our new slipper regulations, for example, and that our checklist for applying for a slipper program. You tell them what they need to be proficient at, but we don't tell them how to do it.
And they can
That's
use,
very
and they could
normal.
probably use the information on the written practical exam for that same purpose.
Exactly. They know
Right.
what the end goal is. How they get about to meeting that end goal is up to the individual or the university program or whatever. That's true fairly universally, that people aren't told what it is they need to do. They're just told, this is what you need to do. You need to figure out how to get there.
So I will be very interested in working with the work group to find out what the thoughts and ideas are out there to prepare trainees and to prepare people to take the exam.
Yeah, I think, just if I can sort of kind of big picture, our goal is consumer protection, and I think nobody in this room would disagree with the idea that taking of an ear impression is potentially one of the most consumer harmful things that an audiologist, a speech pathologist, or a hearing aid dispenser does. It runs the greatest risk of accidental injury that could end up being permanent. Maybe doing fees or something like that in the speech world. But this is a big deal. We're entering, as somebody once said, a bodily orifice. And seriously, it can go wrong, and it's scary when it goes wrong, and it can happen in an instant.
And I'll give an example. When we refer patients to a physician because we see abnormality, we explicitly tell them go to an ear doctor and not to your general physician. Even though he is allowed to do everything, we see so much damage caused by general physicians in the ear.
Yeah. Are there limits on the age range that a hearing aid dispenser or trainee can take an ear impression? Are they restricted to
18.
people 18 years and older? Or could they take an ear impression on a 4-month-old?
No.
Well, I think that's something that when we talk about pediatric fittings is addressed, because if there are restrictions to selling hearing aids to someone under the age of 16.
Sure, yeah.
So if those restrictions exist for a hearing aid dispenser, the same restrictions would exist for a hearing aid dispenser training, meaning, and I think Sabina could probably opine on this, meaning that if you're allowed to sell to someone under the age of 16, if you meet certain requirements, then the same would apply to a hearing aid dispenser trainee.
So then
But-
theoretically then.
Theoretically, it can be-
Theoretically, you could have
Absolutely.
someone
Yes.
taking an ear impression on a 4-month-old.
Yes,
That's terrifying.
yeah.
I mean, I get a little nervous taking an ear impression on a 4-month-old.
Right, and I think we'll talk more about that when we get to that topic, but that's why we're doing this. And I think what we were seeking is a recommendation from the board to delegate this to the hearing aid dispenser committee. I think that's a good suggestion. I think Vanessa, you made that suggestion that we start working with the work groups out there. Do we need a motion by the board?
We already have you want a committee or?
I think we can work with this in the hearing aid dispensers
Committee?
committee and start there. Is that what you were suggesting? Yeah.
Yeah, it's already a standing committee.
Right. Just a delegation of it.
Just, yeah, move it to the committee.
Okay. But do we need a motion to delegate? Okay. Okay.
I just have one other thought that maybe Vanessa can determine this. There is a pretty well-known course, the International Hearing Society, I think. They offer about $1,000 course to prepare you for the exam, so to speak. And it is training. It's meant to be training as well for practice. I'd be curious if there's any idea, or if we can find out from them, how many California dispensers actually enroll in such a thing, or if it's really a minority.
I can get that information. I'll communicate with them. We had done a good amount of work with them last year on a few other issues. I think that they were very involved in the OTC issue federally, so their attention was elsewhere. But now, given the size of our delegation, I think that this should take some of their attention and time.
Yeah, that might be helpful information for this committee, the subcommittee. Thank you.
I'd like also Vanessa, if you can lobby to have one more dispenser on this board.
We're working on it.
Okay, we're on item number 12.
Number 12. A discussion and possible action regarding pediatric hearing aid fitting by hearing dispensers.
This is a similar topic that was brought to my attention, and if you look at Business and Professions Code 2538.37, I referenced it and included the text in my memo. No hearing aid shall be sold by an individual licensed under this chapter to a person 16 years of age or younger, unless within the preceding 6 months a recommendation for a hearing aid has been made by both a board-certified or board-eligible physician specializing in otolaryngology and by a state licensed audiologist. A replacement of an identical hearing aid within 1 year shall be an exception to this requirement. So this is basically stating that hearing aid dispensers can dispense hearing aids to pediatric patients as long as they meet certain requirements. I guess my first question was, how does this happen in the hearing aid dispensary world? I'm not sure, like, is this something that's actually happening? And I know that I briefly spoke with Vanessa about that. She was going to do some.
I might mention, I have a suspicion that this language came out of the day when audiologists could not dispense.
Yes,
It's really old. It's from 1980, or before 1980.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the model forever. I mean, certainly
Yeah.
when I first became an audiologist, as well as you, Marcia, we
Yeah.
would do a hearing aid evaluation on a
put that
child. We would send the child to a hearing aid dispenser to get the hearing aid, and then the child and family would come back.
Yeah.
and
Or an
we
adult.
would- Or not. And we would, do they called it a conformity evaluation, which I think there's still a code for that in CCS, to make sure that the hearing aid the child got is actually the hearing aid that we had recommended. I think where this is still happening to some extent today, our local children's hospital in Los Angeles doesn't dispense hearing aids to CCS patients because of the nightmare of getting reimbursed. So they quote, write the prescription for the hearing aid, send the child and family to an outside dispenser who may or may not be an audiologist, get the hearing aid, and then in theory, I guess the child comes back or goes to, get some kind of verification. And that's really about just being able to bill and get paid for the hearing aids because it's so difficult that it was losing too much money. And I think the other thing that this doesn't really address is that if a child loses their hearing aid, they also lose their ear mold. So in the course of replacing a hearing aid, they would have to replace the ear mold, which once again comes back to the ear impression. There'd have to be a new ear impression taken. Because that's a replacement of an identical hearing aid within 1 year shall be an exception. But if you're replacing an identical hearing aid, you are absolutely going to have to replace an ear mold. And that's going to take a new ear impression. So it seems to me that this B&P code would allow the taking of an ear impression in replacing the identical.
And just the growth of the ear issue, they're going to be
Yeah.
taking them
Yeah,
every,
so there would have to be an ear impression. So this could
Constantly.
be a situation in which.
But I don't see much difference between a dispensing audiology to a hearing aid dispenser to take an ear mold impression from a 2-year-old baby, different in skills. I think that you will find the same professionality.
Well, I think that's making a supposition. I don't think there's any data, and B, I wouldn't agree with you.
Yeah.
But I think that is something that we need to, audiologists get extensive training in taking ear impressions, including ear
No, I'm
impressions
not
of
talking
teeth.
about both of them left the same day school, but let's take somebody who's audiologist out of school now and take a 15 or 20-year-old experience hearing a dispenser. I don't know if you can see a difference, or maybe the dispenser taking better ear impressions. So it's not just the degree, it's a skill. So
well, if it was all, if everybody out there just doing that was a 20-year veteran, then I guess it wouldn't be an issue, but it may not be. But,
it may not be.
But we're
Yeah.
licensing new people all the time who aren't 20-year veterans.
Yeah.
And we're allowing them to do
But
this.
I don't know. I didn't experience hearing a dispenser in us, never took it, or in our area, but HHP maybe know that it's how many of its member dealing
Very
with.
few.
Never, yeah,
Very few.
it's like, it's not it's a non-issue, I think,
Okay,
for
I'm sorry,
dispenser.
and just to be clear, can you finish your sentence? Very few.
There are very few HHP members that I talk to that will even see patients under 16.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So for those that do, they are few and far between. They tend to be CCS cases. And they have very well-established relationships with both the ENTs and the audiologists who are providing the recommendations. It might be more of a supervisory issue because I think that there should be some sort of standard for doing an ear mold on somebody that young. But these are folks who have been doing this for a very long time, and CCS has enough access issues as it is.
Yeah.
We are 35 years in business, and we don't do people, I mean, even less than 18 or 20, I never seen. And my son is like 10 years now, doctor of audiology, and he will not send to somebody who's dealing with pediatrics. Even he can do it, So I don't see it as an issue in the market. Dispenser will not take babies.
This arose from, I think, a concern that there were no questions, and maybe we can't speak too much to that, but there's no verification of their training or knowledge about this population that the board licensing exam addresses.
Yeah.
Well, would questions on a licensing exam or would that qualify someone to work with pediatric patients?
And there are certain questions I would like to know that, or certain areas I'd like to have them demonstrate that they know what they're doing. It's a different endeavor to fit a child with a hearing aid than an adult, and therefore there are underlying foundational information that you could inquire about and make sure that they understand.
So I guess my concern there would be if there's very few people that are doing this, we're going to make the exam more difficult for the
whole entire
whole population of potential hearing
Is that a
users.
bad thing? Is that a bad thing? If you want to,
Well, I think that's where it goes into talking to the people at OPS and looking at, in looking at this, they would probably discover that this is not something that they would need to exam for if they're working with subject matter experts out there. This sounds like it's more of an exception, and I guess the real question is, if we have this statute laid out, it's been around for a long time, probably we said pre-dispensing audiology times, and is this law still relevant the way it's written today? Should something change? I mean, I obviously don't want to affect access issues, but I think at the same time, this is like the training issue that we're looking at, except for this is statute. This is something we need to talk about more.
We can ask the board, the staff, if they ever got a complaint for dispensing a hearing aid to a minor by a hearing aid dispenser or baby. Did we ever got a complaint of dispensing?
I would have to look at that. I don't know that we have.
But you know, it took years for that to happen.
This might be,
Vanessa, did you have a question?
this might be good for committee again.
Send it back to committee.
Because there must be a reason.
What was the question?
We were just talking about the timing of it, because it's,
Right.
how it's rather recent, so that's a good place for the committee to look into go back and look at legislative intent.
I think the law isn't recent, though. I think this had to do more with the merging of the boards.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Because-
that's what he
This
was
one
saying,
was
merging of the
sunset.
board.
But I think the law has been in existence for a really long time. If we looked at the original code, we'd probably find that it's way back in the 80s or something.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
I don't know that for sure, but I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Well, and even the whole phraseology there, a replacement of an identical hearing aid within 1 year shall be an exception. And back in the day when we didn't have digital hearing aids, you know, you would pick a hearing aid off the shelf and it would be pretty much the same electroacoustically. You know, now you can take the same hearing aid and depending on how it's programmed, it could be radically different. So this language just reeks of a different era.
You'll-
So, turn
Good
it
for
back
the
to the
committee.
committee. So now we're on to pediatric.
Yeah, actually, now we're on number 13.
Over-counter, over-the-counter.
Number 13,
Are we delegating this to the committee? Is
To the
that-
committee.
Yes.
That's been designated?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Committee's got a lot of stuff. I think the last time they met.
the next item was just an update on the upcoming federal regulations regarding over-the-counter hearing aids. I think the board has been interested in what is happening with the FDA Reauthorization Act, and these regulations obviously will have a major impact on our state. The way the law reads is that no later than 3 years from the signing of the act, the federal government is to promulgate regulations. I've reached out to contact people at FTC. I actually had a good conversation with them, but I need to talk to the FDA folks, and I'm still waiting to hear from them on how this would affect specifically consumer warranty laws and what their ideas are as far as how this would apply. I imagine other states in our country have the same issues, same type of laws as the Song-Beverly Consumer Warranty Act. So I'm still waiting to hear from them. This will probably continue to be a placeholder on our agenda as we hear more.
It has been made pretty evident that the request has been made to fast track this whole movement. So this is going to be upon us sooner than later, and I realize, or at least it's my general understanding, that federal law supersedes state law. So we'll need to be somewhat nimble when the moment happens. There are hearings that are going on right now, today, yesterday, 3 days ago, where the FDA has been meeting with the Hearing Industries Association and professional organizations. There is definite interest in making this happen quickly.
Right. And there's a lot that they have to worry about as far as just the labeling, the classification, and all those things. What we were particularly interested in was there were two sections of legislation. One was the effect on state law and how broad of a, the text read something along the lines of the state cannot restrict the sale of over-the-counter hearing aids. was that just talking about literally not restricting people from selling over-the-counter hearing aids, or was it talking about any type of restriction or anything that would be considered a restriction, for instance, a warranty or those types of things? And then right after that language, it talks about an individual's right to remedy through the law, and it mentions contract law and warranty law. So we're hoping that the federal regulations will at least reference that and be more specific on how that is going to be implemented.
And, you know, the whole notion of over-the-counter, you know, a physical counter, I mean, hearing aids are available right now today. And in fact, I was preparing for a presentation that I gave last month, and I decided that I wanted to get some over-the-counter hearing aids and do some measurements to see just electroacoustically what they did. So I went to Amazon.com with my credit card, and in 2 days I had a pair of hearing aids and instructions on how to program them, and I was able to do that, make measurements of them. I mean, it was like the best entertainment that Dennis and I had all weekend. It was like playing with these hearing aids, and did some electroacoustic and on-ear measurements, and decided that they were largely POSs. And then we packaged them all up and returned them to Amazon. Did we ever get a credit on our credit card?
Yeah.
And they were expensive. I mean, I didn't go for the cheapies. There were some that were as inexpensive as $12 a pair.
I had an interesting experience presenting to a group of seniors, and there were representatives there from Costco. There were audiologists, and someone in the audience asked about, you know, how much should we expect to pay for a hearing aid? And the audiologist got up there, he gave a very good explanation of that. And then one of the audience members raised his hand. He said, I purchased my hearing aids for $20. They came from Hong Kong, and it's the 6th pair that I've gotten, and they work great.
Yeah.
And then he was like, what? So it was interesting.
Yeah. So I think, you know, this is a classic example of the barn door is open right now. And, you know, we're going to be chasing the rear end of that horse, trying to impose some kinds of rules and regulations and consumer protection. But the barn door is open. That horse is off and running. And over-the-counter, PSAPs, online, they're all available right now today.
Right.
So I just think we have to be nimble in terms of what this means for people who have licenses, who also choose to work with over-the-counter hearing aids in terms of right to return policies, do they or do they not apply? Medical clearance, does it or doesn't it apply? What does the contract look like? Does that or doesn't it apply? I mean, all of this stuff is going to upend everything that we do, not only in our regulations, but in the statute.
Right, and some of those things are already very clear in the federal legislation. It's some of those other gray areas, because we regulate licensees. You know, we're not charged with doing what the FDA has to do. But I think that, you know, once we get that information, it'll be helpful for us to know what we are looking at. So we're trying to stay on top of that too. And we will be as nimble as we can be.
It's hard to imagine that, okay, Song Beverly is going to apply to this class of hearing aids,
Right.
but not that class of hearing aids. And you explain that to the consumer, that,
Right.
oh, yeah, we can't help you with that, but, you know,
Yeah.
we do have this return policy date that the federal, it's going to be very confusing.
That's
Well,
why.
it will be, and like that, you know, and the pair of hearing aids that I ordered on the web, I mean, they were really nice looking. They looked like one of our major manufacturers.
Yeah.
You know, you could not look at that hearing aid and say, this one's the over-the-counter one, or this one's the internet sales one, and this one is the one I bought from the audiologist. I mean, they were identical. Right?
That's why when you say consumer effects here, I think it's a very important part of educating consumer about these two type of hearing aids, ones that are purchased over the internet and one that are purchased in a licensed regulated dispenser. It's more important than a telecoin information.
Good luck. I wouldn't say that out loud.
Okay, I think we're on
Okay.
to,
We're on to 15 because
Yes.
you gave your report yesterday.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
okay.
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah. Thank you.
do this, so we want to at least try to ease the process through the regulatory language. We took a first look at this, maybe a first and second look at this. This is the second time we're seeing this?
Yes.
Second time, okay, so first look at this at our last meeting, and I think that we've come up with some more changes. Probably the best thing to do is just to go through it line by line. It's not very much text, and I know Amnon and Marcia have both given us input on this as a subcommittee. So I think the first section, A through E, has everybody read that, and are there any suggestions or edits on that?
That was the same as last meeting.
Yeah. I know, I'm asking if
Yeah.
there's anything else. Okay. And then I think we go into F, which I think when we were looking at the exam requirements, we started talking about what is included in F and realized that some of this information was outdated. So do either Amnon or Marcia want to talk about F, or should we just go through it line by line? Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to, we can do it line by line.
Go ahead.
But practical exam shall cover the procedures and use of instruments and equipment commonly employed in the fitting and selling of hearing aids, including but not limited to. Number 2 says pure tone, and we changed this to discrete frequency, which is good. But I don't know what threshold type audiometer is. Is there a different kind of audiometer than a threshold type?
There's a screening audiometer.
Oh, yeah. There
Yeah,
is. And
so-
screening can't
so
go below
screening, you
25.
can't- Yeah, you can't change the intensity. And once
Okay.
again, I will point out that that is the wrong spelling of the word discrete.
Oh,
Right.
Please, let's make that ETE, else it looks like a really silly sentence.
okay. So that's that.
Very
Yeah.
discreet.
Be very.
Do you want to keep going line by line? I have
So this
something
was
in number
actually
3.
misspelled in the original regulation?
Yeah.
Okay. Just to be sure we don't get it wrong, can you give us the
Yeah.
correct spelling?
DISCRETE.
Okay.
Just the end. Switch to 2.
It's not like proceed and proceed. Okay. So number 3, I like these changes, appropriate equipment for establishing speech recognition threshold and word recognition scores. Under headphones, but this last part, and/or sound field media by recorded or live voice. So as far as I know, I don't know how the practical exam is done. Do you actually ask people to perform these using those methodologies? Is there a way to do it?
There's no sound field in practical exam.
There's no sound field in the practical exam. Do you question it in the written exam? Is that why it's in here?
I don't know about what's in the written exam, but I think what we should be asking is this something that needs to be
This is practical though.
tested for in the practical
I don't-
exam?
Why would we include sound field?
No, we don't need to.
So if
I
it,
mean, sound field shouldn't even be in this sentence.
so if it doesn't need to be there, we should remove it and be able to justify why we're removing it.
Yeah, because if you're
Yeah,
testing
because
in sound field,
you
you're
can't
testing
put
both
the-
ears simultaneously.
No, I mean, you have sound field, you need to
Yeah.
do a speed, and you need to calibrate the system.
Yeah, no,
before
that's
you
just- That's
operate
just
it.
silly. It just
So,
doesn't make sense.
so does the sentence end at under headphones?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, except do we want to include the concept of recorded or live voice? Because the recorded and live voice
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
pertains to headphones.
Okay, so by recorded or live voice?
Yeah.
Just take out and/or sound field media.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
So what are we taking out, please?
So I'll read the sentence. Appropriate equipment for establishing speech recognition threshold and word recognition scores under headphones by recorded or live voice.
And can you please reread number 2?
Number 2 is just replacing, is correcting the spelling of discrete to DISCRETE.
And we're leaving threshold type audiometer?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
This is about fitting and selling hearing aids. Nobody's going to use a screening audiometer to fit or sell hearing aids, are they?
But I think what we're saying is we're defining the type of audiometer, right?
Yeah.
That they would bring, yes.
Yeah, they're required to bring it.
They're required to bring it, so you want them to bring them.
We wouldn't want them to bring a
Right.
different one. Okay.
So speaking of bringing, Amna and I worked on number 5,
Yeah.
equipment for
hearing
the
aid.
evaluation, testing of hearing aid performance. We don't think people are bringing those. They're,
I don't think that most even officers has it today.
oh, I do.
You do.
Well, it's part of-
my son did that, the one that I purchased in 1985, 32 years ago, I think.
And he has to crank it from the
32,
side.
no, Fry's analyzer.
Yeah, I know.
We worked for 5 years, from 85 to 90, and once the digital cam, we left it. It was for 30, and now I gave it to him, and he installed it again because he's designing and manufacturing monitors for entertainment and security and stuff like this, in-ear monitor, so he needs to analyze his own device that
Well,
he's doing, but there's no.
Can I ask you a question on
use it.
that?
I use mine. It's part of my real ear equipment, but I use it to verify functionality, especially with developmentally delayed folks, pediatrics. You know, I use it.
So we're talking about number 5, correct?
Yeah, we-
Equipment
Yeah,
designed
but we
for...
use it, but I don't think people bring one.
But,
to the-
so let me ask a question. Equipment designed for the evaluation and testing of hearing aid performance, isn't that a very broad definition? And can't that be a minor piece of
The only
equipment?
thing we do is a stethoscope. What-
There is calibrated equipment that one
Which one?
uses
Wait,
to,
But we're talking about 5, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
5. There's no question about, there's no practical exam on 5.
Well, but is there minor type of equipment that could be used to
No.
test the performance
I
of a
have
hearing
no
aid, like a
idea.
battery tester or something like that?
yeah, but I don't think this is what this
It's not.
hearing aids
But I'm
performance,
just,
that's battery.
I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah.
Is there any other type of, that
I'm
could
not
possibly be
familiar.
part of a practical exam? Okay.
Does this refer to the written exam too,
The
though?
F is only
It just
talking about
F
the
is,
practical
but-
exam.
So we're only have to address that.
Yeah.
So no, I think it's not some small thing that,
Okay. Well, it's not limited to what's in here, so
Okay.
I think we're okay.
I think some of this was included because there was, at one point, there was certainly a narrative. How would you assess this hearing aid? There would be a discussion about it. And
Okay.
so they would say, oh, I use a 2cc coupler measure, and, here's what we do. So they would be referring to that, but it wouldn't necessarily be tooling the procedure
Okay.
to prove and describe it.
I don't believe there's questions about this in the practical exam.
I'm only, my experience with the practical exam recently has only been at one station.
Can I just tell her,
Yeah.
make sure that when we're talking about the practical exam, that we speak in very general terms, because everyone who is part of the practical exam, whether you take it or whether you're a subject matter expert, signs a confidentiality clause that we're not supposed to discuss the practical exam. So people that take the practical exam are not supposed to go and say, hey, I just took the practical exam, wow, this is what happened. That's something that we should probably just speak in general terms and maybe ask questions as to whether something is there.
Because maybe I have some sources.
Well, your sources are involved in unprofessional conduct. They're talking to you about this. So you might want to caution them to not talk about the exam. Okay.
so we're taking it out anyway.
Yes, so we are now on the new number 4. You want to continue, Marcia?
I don't have any other
Okay.
issues that I wanted to.
Emma, did you have anything else, Sarah?
No,
Under
that's
F?
it.
Okay.
Number 4 covers it.
Okay, and then we go to 1399.121, which I think there have been no changes to this, if I'm correct, from the last edits that we made. Written examination records shall be retained by the board.
I would just suggest the title be adjusted
That'll be
to
what?
retention of examination records,
Okay,
just the title. Because it's not talking about inspection, it's only talking about retention.
So, and I had a comment too. So, prior to that, it talked about keeping it for 2 years after the date of examination. So, you've removed that, so how long are you going to keep the records? Is it in perpetuity, or?
I think the reason for that is because we already have a records retention schedule that we keep. And it's not something that has to be in regulation. For instance, all of our retention requirements, we don't establish those in regs, because then we'd have to go back and change them every time we want to change them.
And may I ask, what is the record? What is the document we're speaking of?
That they took it, or they passed it or failed it? I don't know.
Right.
I think we talked
do
about
have that.
I think that's actually everything that's associated with the written exam, anything that we keep. And that's something that we could talk about probably in-house as far as that goes.
Because we don't really have the exam, the written exam.
Right.
Right.
It's done electronically? It's taken electronically? The
No, but
written
it's by a
exam?
vendor.
No.
By a third-party vendor.
Yeah, and they give you fail or
And
pass,
we
or
don't
they give
have
you a
fail.
grade, no grade?
I could give everybody a little bit of history on that too. In every board office, we have these old safes that we used to keep. I know, Karen, you remember the one that we had at Medin. There was a time when the board kept their own examination records, and the board was really, involved in the questions, and we had these question data banks and all these things. We don't do that anymore. This is actually a third party that handles it, and OPS, Office of Professional Examination Services, keeps a lot of this information. So we would keep written examination records, but that's a broad term and something that we can determine in-house. I think what we're getting at here is that this doesn't have to be that specific. The next section is 1399.122, practical examination appeals. Were there any changes to this? Okay, so this is something we already discussed.
The only changes were to F.
Okay, very good.
Change it from 60 days to 30 days.
That was, yeah.
But that's something we covered at the last board meeting. So I think we just have any other questions from the board or from the
Yeah.
public, and I think we can proceed.
From the audience, right?
Yes.
Are there any other questions from the audience?
Okay, now we need to
Okay.
read a very special script.
Wait,
I'm going to read
okay.
it and somebody can say, so moved. The motion would be that we approve the proposed text for a 45-day public comment period and delegate to the executive officer the authority to adopt the proposed regulatory changes if there are no adverse comments received during the public comment period, and also delegate to the executive officer the authority to make any technical and non-substantive changes that may be required in completing the rulemaking file.
So moved.
Sam, none.
Second.
Discussion.
Okay, this has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion from someone on the board?
Well, we're going to come back to that pediatric ear impression issue in terms of this, or am I wrong? We weren't going to do that. It's not the right place.
No, I think that's a whole other issue in itself that we need to do a little more discovery on.
But that was the original issue that came up, is nothing appears on the exams about that.
Well,
Well, I think that we have two things. One is the regulatory language itself, we were approaching it because it was a difficult process for the board. And that was to remove the handcuffs from the board and allow us to actually do the examination application process without all these requirements. The question about the pediatric dispensing, I think, is more of a question on the issues with the law in itself and the issues that are out there happening in the real world. And then I think we approach some of these other items, because I'm not so sure that, one, it's not on the exam, or that it is on the exam. That's something that I can consult with other people. But the exam is, to me, a separate issue from the actual law itself that allows it.
and you also have the including but not limited to in this reg language that encompasses, that,
Okay.
includes things that are not on this list.
Okay.
But you're right, that is still something that at some point we are going to have to address.
Right.
Yeah.
Any comments from the public? Okay, then we'll call the roll. Allison?
Aye.
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 Okay, passed.
Item 16, we have a couple of informational items on legislation. And I just want to add on this topic that one thing that we are looking at doing as a board is establishing committees, maybe along more of a general board structured committee. For instance, our committees right now are focused on the practices, the individual practices of speech language pathology, audiology, and hearing aid dispensing. But there are, for instance, legislation, enforcement, those are important things that the board does, and board staff would really appreciate help from board members and actually hands-on help in working on some of these areas, because you're all experts in your field and you can help us. So one area that we are looking at in the future is having a legislative committee with the board made up of staff and board members, and when we present this information to you, it would be presented by our board members. So what we have today are if we're kind of out of the season of legislation, and we're going to be starting up new again, but what we have is AB 1706, which is the board's sunset bill. And I just want to congratulate the board and everybody that was involved in the sunset process. This was signed by the governor, and we are officially a board for 4 more years. So high fives to everyone. Our first
Board included, as well as staff, who were tremendous help.
The next bill is a federal bill. It was listed as HR 1539, and that is the Early Hearing Detection Intervention Act. It was signed as S652, and I think, Allison, you were going to talk about that? Oh, just real quick, I also included some information from the American Academy of Audiology, the issue brief that is at the very end.
Good.
But go ahead, Allison.
The very end of that tab.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, good. Yeah, so briefly, this is the EDDI bill, Early Hearing Detection Intervention is EDDI. It requires periodic reauthorization, and it just seemed to sort of take a long time this year. Maybe it does every session, and I just haven't paid attention in the past. But this is what really gives rise to newborn hearing screening, all the activities associated with making sure that babies that are born with hearing loss have their hearing loss identified early and receive intervention, both audiologic intervention and educational intervention, very early on, according to the principles of 136, which is screening by 1 month of age, audiologic diagnosis by 3 months of age, and enrollment in early intervention as soon as possible, but no later than 6 months of age. And we know through a lot of research that babies that meet the 136 guidelines have better language and psychosocial outcomes on down the road. So it's a very important activity. So this is just a routine reauthorization. It just seemed to take a little bit longer this year. So this is all a very, very good thing to keep these programs going in all of the states.
Allison, so the 136, is that actually part of the law?
No, that's just part of the guidelines. Those are just part
Guidelines.
of, and that really comes from the Joint Committee on Infant Hearing and, other research that just shows that these milestones are, what we strive for. It's not anywhere in the law,
Okay.
but it's sort of how it plays out practically. And then, I actually haven't read this entire document from the Academy, but it just kind of goes through why this is so important and why we want to see it keep going. Because really there is no point in doing newborn hearing screening whatsoever if there is not adequate and appropriate follow-up in terms of diagnosis and early intervention. So screening for the sake of screening is expensive and useless.
And I encourage everyone to read this one pager. When I first came to the board, one of the first things Allison talked to me about, and reading this, it's pretty astounding. From 2000 to the present, 44% of newborns were screened in 2000, now 97%. And then the second bullet point talks about how it's in the follow-up that we're still losing, and we need to do a better job there. So.
Yeah, so there is sort of a real attention being paid to loss to follow-up, which just basically means those kids who don't pass newborn hearing screening, who don't get followed up. And the reality is there is no such thing as loss to follow-up, but because these kids will eventually come in at the age of 3 years, not speaking, not hearing, and so they're never really lost. They're just hideously
Hidden.
delayed in some cases. And that still does occur for a variety of reasons, unfortunately, but it's vastly improved now as compared with many years ago. The average age of identification of hearing loss when I was a young audiologist was about 2.5 years. And when you consider that a baby hears their mother's voice from 20 weeks gestation, that's a long time to not be hearing language. And so the average age now is somewhere around 8 months, but still, there still is a wide spread, and there are still many, many kids who, for a variety of reasons, don't get in for timely follow-up. So this is a motherhood and apple pie kind of act. Nobody could possibly argue with this.
I think we went from 44 to 97 because states didn't want to spend the money to do it.
Yeah.
And that this made sure that they had to do it. Yeah, that's
Now, I
not
think
in
it's
law.
not agendized, so I probably can't make a comment about CHIP, right?
Well, when we talk about future agenda items,
Okay, good.
you can. That's what we're on now, is number 17.
Next board meeting is in Sacramento, February 8th and 9th. Then Bay Area, August 9th is to be determined, and as is November. I have been asked to set the date for February 2019. Is that correct, Karen? Coming back to Dominguez,
Gosh, we won't meet again. We go from February to August?
February to August.
We have signs.
Really?
February,
Oh,
May,
oh,
August. I was looking at this one.
Oh, here, it's right in the
This one is, okay,
Yeah, okay.
we've got November 8th.
Okay.
Yeah.
So which one you saying coming back?
So I think for February, what we need is just dates, need to look at calendar dates. And you may want to just look at all the upcoming days. February is already set, but you may want to just confirm that May, August, and November work for you. If for some reason a date doesn't work for you, give us alternate dates. For instance, the month of May may not change, but if you could just at least give us some options, we can look at that. The more information we have up front, the easier it is for us to plan. So for February 2019, Dee, it would be helpful if they could just send us their dates. 2019.
19.
That's what you were talking about, right?
Yes, all I need are the dates so that I can reserve.
Right. So you,
If you send me, do you know what the dates are?
Well, it says the 7th and 8th on the board calendar.
For 2019? Oh, wait, go to the second page.
But then for August of 2018, where did we want to hold that? Northern California, Southern California, is there?
Well, if we've got a Sacramento and a Bay Area back-to-back, it feels like we should be looking at LA, Orange County, somewhere in Southern California.
I think last time we tried San Diego in
San Diego.
August, right? And that seemed to
Yeah.
work out okay.
So San Diego for August of 18?
Sounds good.
Because if you guys, you all recall, and I'm pointing out that we were going to San Diego in the cold weather and staying in Sacramento in the hot weather.
Right.
And the reason for that wasn't because we didn't have good, weather reports. It's because typically boards kept their meetings after the fiscal year in Sacramento because of budget restrictions. But we haven't had that problem, so thank you, Amnon.
How about November of 2018?
Looks like it should be back in Sacramento again.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then the
Yeah.
February's is here. So this view.
How about May of 2019?
I think that might be a little too much.
Seriously?
No.
South Lake Town.
You can tell that Karen's the one that handles the contracts for these
South
things.
Lake Town.
Yes.
I have no idea.
South-
Why is AAA going back to Ohio
Yeah.
again?
Now you're talking.
Nice place there. I've been there.
With 19.
Wasn't AAA in
I
Cleveland?
think we'll just stick with what we
last
have
year?
right now.
No, it was in Indian.
February
Oh,
20.
Indianapolis.
Karen,
But Ohio.
do you want me to ask for
Yes.
February 7, 8?
Yes.
Okay. I will be doing that January 2nd. We book 13 months in advance,
Yeah, I told him. Yeah.
so. Anything else?
Future agenda items?
Oh,
Pardon?
future agenda items.
Got them?
Does anyone have any other future
Yeah.
agenda items?
And
So there was some discussion about revisiting the slipper regulations, right?
Yes. Yes, we'll be bringing slipper regulations back to the board.
And probably just as a placeholder, depending on what's happening with over-the-counter, we're going to want to be able to discuss that again.
Now, Allison, you had another bill that you were going to mention?
Oh, that was the chip, which hopefully will be a done deal by then. But it's not right now.
What is it?
What is
The
it?
Children's Health Insurance Program not being reauthorized. There, I just gave it away. But everybody knows, all you got to do is read a newspaper. I mean, it's right there.
Was there going to be an audiology committee meeting?
Yes, and why was there? The answer is yes.
Well, it sounds like certainly hearing aid dispensing meeting as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like there was something else that you and I had talked about that wasn't on the agenda, but maybe I'm crazy.
And neither of my issues can be addressed, right?
Which one?
Controversial ones.
Yeah.
Which one's that?
Yeah,
The
I
aid
know it
and the
wasn't.
English proficiency. Can't do that. Oh, telepractice. Will you have time to do that?
I think that, yeah, the issue there is that, what were the next steps we were going to discuss?
So regarding the issue of telepractice, if staff had time, it would be to look at what telepractice regulations already exist in the DCA.
Okay. That's a pretty broad research project, though.
Yeah.
Well,
Telepractice.
For other boards?
I mean, other
Yeah.
boards in DCA.
But other boards' regulations.
Regulations exist in DCA.
I absolutely know that there are.
Yes.
The question is, that's a pretty expansive project to look at all the regulations.
Optometry?
I think maybe we should
Maybe we can
look at what.
divide it up into assigning people X number of boards to take a look at the regs to see if there are.
We can do that, but perhaps we should just be talking about what we need to do. What specifically is needed for speech language pathology?
Well, that is needed.
But what type of, what requirements in regulation, what laws are we trying to affect? What is it we're trying to do?
Well, I don't know, because we're trying to gather evidence
So
right
the
now to
committee-
see what already does exist. Rather
Okay.
than, that's, I can't answer
I just
that.
I imagine, well, I worked for the Veterinary Medical Board before. They had very specific regulations, for instance, on client-patient relationships and seeing a pet in that way. So that it was specific to that. I imagine that there's specific things that we want to look at in speech language pathology. Perhaps that's a practice committee discussion first. Since we've already talked about it at the board level, in a broad sense, perhaps we could talk about that at the SLP committee level.
Well, what we'll talk about is saying that we need to find out what current regulations in telehealth exist on other boards. I mean, that's what the issue is. So, I'm not sure that we need a practice committee to say this is what we need to look at.
But we
That
might
is
need
what
a
we need
committee
to
to
look at.
say, this is what we want to do.
Well,
I don't know what we want to do until we
Okay, that-
actually see what regulations already exist.
We don't.
I need to
But
gather
typically, if
some
you're
data.
changing a regulation, you're changing it because there's a need to change it or add something that's needed. I guess it would be helpful to look at what other boards are doing, but I think we really have to determine what is the need in our area of practice.
Again, I don't know.
Like, for
until
instance, the RPE telehealth supervision was one of them that we talked about last
Yes.
time. So I think we'd want to look specifically at that and talk with.
I think the issue is broader than just
Right,
RPE
I was giving you a for
supervision.
instance,
Yeah.
because I think if we just pull out all the regulations on telehealth, you're going to have a lot of unnecessary information.
Okay.
I mean, any other thoughts on that?
So we have
we
some
can't
current
continue to
regulations on
We
telehealth?
discuss
don't
it.
have any
We don't have any.
regulations on telehealth.
I think what we're
There
trying to
aren't-
determine
aren't.
is what the agenda item is going to be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, okay,
I think we can provide information from other states and professional organizations if you want regarding recommendations for regulations we could discuss.
and the only reason we're talking about this is to determine if this was going to be a committee agenda item or a board agenda item.
Okay,
So if we want to bring it to the board, we can do that too, and
gotcha. Okay.
And I would appreciate help in doing that research. I imagine Asha probably has information there, and we can look within DCA.
All right, why don't we just have
Okay.
it as an SLP practice committee?
Okay.
I think that we should continue. Did we already do this? Just to have a placeholder on OTC. That is, we've got.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
good, because as this evolves, we're going to want to be able to discuss where we are currently, and, you know, the moment at which, it's my understanding that this is really being fast-tracked, and so we want to be one step ahead of when it actually launches.
I'm sorry, why would the telehealth be on the SLP committee?
I think we were talking specifically on SLP telehealth issues, right? They would have to be
But
handled
there are
separately.
other-
Audiology does
There,
telehealth too.
exactly.
It should just be a bigger discussion.
So they,
That's what I
audiology
think,
does
yes.
telehealth also.
Well, I was thinking that they would be separate issues. Would they be the same issues?
I would think many of them would be.
Okay. Then it could be,
So that kind of demands a board look at it.
So now, who's isn't it?
I think on telehealth, when we're putting together the board agenda item, when staff are putting together the board agenda item, what we gave you last time was a very general background document, because we don't have any specific direction on what we're looking at. So we can give you information on what other boards are doing, but you're just going to have a lot of regulations to review. It's going to be, I imagine it'll be a pretty substantial amount of information. What we don't have is what specific issues are we looking to address? Just telehealth in itself? Right, we can take a stab at that.
Well, I guess how I view it is a little bit, like I'm sounding so university-like, a little bit like a research project. The first thing you have to do is a review of what already exists. Then you need to, by reviewing what already exists, need to identify what specific issues are of concern to you. 'Cause I sound like a recording, but I don't know exactly what the issues are.
Okay.
I just need some broader information to know what's currently out there, and then I can take a look at, and what do we need to know from all of this?
Okay.
Telehealth is relatively new in the scheme of things, and I think a lot of us are somewhat in the dark about it and all its implications. So I think investigating it is probably a good
Okay.
thing.
Do you know off the top of your head, without doing a bunch of research, what boards within DCA recognize provision of services via?
We have that general BMP code section if you don't have your regs.
We included that in
Oh, yeah.
in the last board meeting information. So as Sabine explained, there's general business and professions code, law that defines telehealth. I think there are some different boards have tackled it differently because they have different issues. But I think, I'm sure that we could find, there are some boards that have had to address it with a little more urgency, and we can look at some of those boards. I could probably consult with legal staff and see if we could find out who those are.
I think that would be a great
Okay.
start. Yes.
Okay, that's all we have.
Got enough on your plate? We're ready to adjourn.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for coming. We appreciate your input. We appreciate the fact that you're here. Thanks to staff again, and we are adjourned.